This is the first day of Beverly Brantley. This is where I read Beverly Cleary books, and I switch Cleary into Brantley. And first book I will be reading is Henry Huggins. The first chapter is Henry and Ribs. Here we go. Henry Huggins was in the 3rd grade. His hair looked like a scrubbing brush, and most of his grown-up front teeth were in. He lived with his mother and father in a square white house on Klickitat Street. Except for having his toenails out when he was sick and breaking his arm falling out of the cherry tree when he was 7, nothing much happened to Henry. I wish something exciting would happen, Henry often thought, but nothing very interesting ever happened to Henry. At least, not until one Wednesday afternoon in March. You see, every Wednesday after school, Henry rode downtown on the bus to go swimming at the YMCA. After he swam for an hour, he got on the bus again and rode home just in time for dinner. It was fun, but not really exciting. When Henry left the YMCA on this particular Wednesday, he stopped to watch a man tear down a circus poster. Then, with 3 nickels and 1 dime in his pocket, he went to the corner drugstore to buy a chocolate ice cream cone. He thought he would eat the ice cream cone, get on the bus, drop his dime in the slot, and ride home. That is not what happened, though. He bought the ice cream cone and paid for it with 1 of his nickels. On his way out of the drugstore, he stopped to look at the funny books. It was a free look because he only had 2 nickels left. So he stood there licking his chocolate ice cream cone and reading one of the funny books when he heard a thump, thump, thump. Henry turned, and there behind him was a dog. The dog was scratching himself. He wasn't any special kind of dog. He was too small to be a big dog, but on the other hand, he was much too big to be a little dog. He wasn't white dog because parts of him were brown and other parts were black. And in between, there was yellowish patches. His ears stood up and his tail was long and thin. The dog was hungry. When Henry licked, he licked. When Henry swallowed, he swallowed. "Hello, you old dog," Henry said. "You can't have my ice cream cone." Swish, swish, swish went the tail. "Just one bite," the dog's brown eyes seemed to say. "Go away," ordered Henry. He wasn't very firm about it. He patted the dog's head. The tail wagged harder. Henry took one last lick. "All right," he said. "If you're really that hungry, you might as well have it." The ice cream cone disappeared in one gulp. "Now, go away," Henry told the dog. "I have to catch a bus for home." He started for the door. The dog started too. "Go away, you skinny old dog." Henry didn't say it very loudly. "Go on home." The dog sat down at Henry's feet. He looked at the dog, and the dog looked at Henry. "I don't think you've got a home. You're awful thin. Your ribs show right through your skin." "Thump, thump, thump," replied the tail. "And you haven't got a collar," said Henry. He began to think if only he could keep the dog. He had always wanted a dog of his very own, and now he found a dog that wanted him. He couldn't go home and leave a hungry dog on the street corner. If only he knew what his mother and father would say. He fingered 2 nickels in his pocket. That was it. He would use one of the nickels to phone his mother. "Come on, Ribs. Come on, old Ribs. Come on, old boy. I'm going to call you Ribsy because you're so thin." The dog trotted after the boy to the telephone booth. In the corner of the drugstore, Henry shoved him into the booth and shut the door. He had never used a payphone before. He put the telephone book on the floor and stand on tiptoe to reach the mouthpiece. He gave the operator his number and dropped his nickel into the coin box. "Hello, Mom." "Why, Henry," his mother sounded surprised. "Where are you?" "At the drugstore near the Y. Ribsy began to scratch. Thump, thump, thump. Inside the telephone booth, the thump sounded so loud and hollow. For goodness sake, Henry, what is that noise? His mother demanded. Ribs began to whimper and then to howl. Henry, Mrs. Huggins shouted, are you all right? Yes, I'm all right, Henry shouted back. He never could understand why his mother always thought something had happened to him when nothing ever did. That's just Ribsy. Ribsy, his mother was exasperated. Henry, will you please tell me what is going on? I'm trying to, said Henry. Ribsy howled louder. People were gathering around the telephone booth to see what was going on. Mother, I found a dog. I sure wish I could keep him. He's a good dog. I'd feed him and wash him and everything. Please, Mom? I don't know, dear, his mother said. You'll have to ask your father. Mom, Henry wailed. That's what you always say. Henry was tired of standing on the tiptoe on the phone booth. He was getting worn. Mom, please say yes, and I'll never ask for another things as long as I live. Well, all right, Henry. I guess there isn't any reason why you shouldn't have a dog, but you'll have to bring him home on the bus. Your father is in the car today. I can't come after you. Can you manage? Sure, easy. And Henry, please don't be late. It looks as if it might rain. All right, Mom. Thump, thump, thump. Henry, what's that thumping noise? It's my dog, Ribsy. He's scratching a flea. Oh, Henry, Mrs. Huggins moaned. Couldn't you have found a dog without fleas? Henry thought it was a good time to hang up. Come on, Ribs, he said. We're going home on the bus. When the big green bus stopped in front of the drugstore, Henry picked up his dog. Ribsy was heavier than he expected. He had a hard time getting him into the bus and was wondering how he would get a dime out of his pocket when the driver said, Hey, say, Sonny, you can't take that dog on the bus. Why not? Asked Henry. It's company rule, Sonny. No dogs on the buses. Golly, mister, how am I going to get him home? I just have to get him home. Sorry, Sonny. I didn't make the rule. No animal can ride on a bus unless it's inside a box. Well, thanks anyway, said Henry doubtfully, and lifted Ribsy off the bus. Well, I guess we'll have to get a box. I'll get you onto the next bus somehow, promised Henry. He went back into the drugstore and followed closely by Ribsy. Have you got a big box I could have, please? He asked the man at the toothpaste counter. I need one big enough for my dog. The clerk leaned over the counter to look at Ribsy. A cardboard box? He asked. Yes, please, said Henry, wishing the man would hurry. He didn't want to be late getting home. The clerk pulled a box out from under the counter. This hair tonic cartoon is the only one I have. I guess it's big enough, but why would anyone want to put a dog in a cardboard box? I can't understand. The box was about 2 square feet and 6 inches deep. One end was printed, Don't let them call you Baldy, and on the other side, Try our large economy size. Henry thanked the clerk, carried the box out to the bus, and put it on the sidewalk. Ribsy padded after him. Get in, fellow, Henry commanded Ribsy. Ribsy understood. He stepped into the box and sat down. Just as the bus came around the corner, Henry had to kneel to pick the box up. It was not a very strong box. He had to put his arms under it. He staggered as he lifted it, feeling like a strong man who had lifted weights in the circus. Ribsy lovingly licked his face with a wet pink tongue. Hey, cut that out, Henry ordered. You'd better be good if you're going to ride on the bus with me. The bus stopped at the curb. When it was Henry's turn to get on, he had trouble finding the step because he couldn't see his feet. He had to try several times before he hit it. Then he discovered he had forgotten to take the dime out of his pocket. He was afraid to put the box down for fear Ribsy might escape. He turned sideways to the driver and asked politely, "Will you please take the dime out of my pocket for me? My hands are full." The driver pushed his cap back on his head and exclaimed, "Full! I should say that you are full. And just where do you think you're going with that animal?" "Home," said Henry in a small voice. The passengers were staring, and most of them were smiling. The box was getting heavier every minute. "Not on this bus, you're not," said the driver. "But the man on the last bus said I could take the dog on the bus," protested Henry, who was afraid he could not hold on the dog much longer. "He said it was a company rule. He meant a big box tied shut and a box with holes punched in it for the dogs to breathe through." Henry was horrified to hear Ribsy growl. "Shut up," he ordered. Ribsy began to scratch his left ear with his left hind foot. The box began to tear. Ribsy jumped out of the box off the bus, and Henry jumped after him. The bus pulled away with a puff of exhaust. "Now see what you've done. You've spoiled everything." The dog hung his head and tucked his tail between his legs. "If I can't get you home, how can I keep you?" Henry sat down on the curb to think. It was so late and the clouds were so dark that he didn't want to waste time looking for a big box. His mother was probably being too worried about him. People were stopping on the corner to wait for the next bus. Among them, Henry noticed an elderly lady carrying a large paper shopping bag full of apples. The shopping bag gave Henry an idea. Jumping up, he snapped his fingers at Ribs and ran back into the drugstore. "You back again?" asked the toothpaste clerk. "What do you want this time? String and paper to wrap your dog in?" "No, sir," said Henry. "I want one of those big nickel shopping bags." He laid his last nickel on the counter. "Well, I'll be darned," said the clerk, and handed the bag across the counter. Henry opened the bag and set it up on the floor. He picked up Ribsy and shoved him in feet first into the bag. Then he pushed his front feet in. A lot of Ribsy was left over. The clerk was leaning over the counter watching. "I guess I'll have to have some string and paper too," Henry said, "if I can't have some free." "Well, now, I've seen everything." The clerk shook his head and handed a piece of string and a big sheet of paper across the counter. Ribsy whimpered, but he held still while Henry wrapped the paper loosely around his head and shoulders and tied it with the string. The dog made a lumpy package, but by taking one handle of the bag in each hand, Henry was able to carry it to the bus stop. He didn't think the bus driver would notice him. It was getting dark, and a crowd of people, most of them with packages, was waiting on the corner. Of a few spatters of rain hit the pavement. This time, Henry remembered his dime. Both hands were full, so he held the dime in his teeth and stood behind the woman with the bag of apples. Ribsy wiggled and whined, even though Henry tried to pet him through the paper. When the bus stopped, he climbed on behind the lady, quickly set the bag down, dropped his dime in the slot, picked up the bag, and squirmed through the crowd to a seat beside a fat man near the back of the bus. "Whew!" Henry sighed. With relief, the driver was the same one he had met on the first bus. But Ribs was on the bus at last. Now, if he could only keep him quiet for 15 minutes, they would be home and Ribsy would be for keeps. The next time the bus stopped, Henry saw Scooter McCarthy, a 5th grader at school, get on and make his way through the crowd to the back of the bus. "Just in my luck," thought Henry. "I bet he wants to know what's in my bag." "Hi," said Scooter. "Hi," said Henry. "What you got in that bag?" asked Scooter. None of your beeswax, answered Henry. Scooter looked at Henry. Henry looked at Scooter. Crackle, crackle went the bag. Henry tried to hold it on more tightly between his knees. "There's something alive in that bag," Scooter said anxiously. "Shut up, Scooter," whispered Henry. "Aw, shut up yourself," said Scooter. "You've got something alive in that bag." By this time, the passengers at the back of the bus were staring at Henry and the package. Crackle, crackle, crackle. Henry tried to pat Ribsy again through the paper. The bag crackled even louder. Then it began to wiggle. "Come on, tell us what's in the bag," coaxed the fat man. "Nothing," stammered Henry. "Just something I found." "Maybe it's a rabbit," suggested one of the passengers. "I think it's clicking." "No, it's too big for a rabbit," said another. "I'll bet it's a baby," said Scooter. "I'll bet you kidnapped a baby." "I did not." Ribs began to whimper, and then to howl. Crackle, 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 thump, thump, thump. Ribsy scratched his way out of the bag. "Well, I'll be donged," exclaimed the fat man, and began to laugh. "I'll be donged. It's just a skinny old dog," said Scooter. "He is not a good dog." Henry tried to keep Ribsy between his knees. The bus lurched around the corner and started to go uphill. Henry was thrown against the fat man, and frightened, the dog wiggled away from him, squirmed between the passengers, and started for the front of the bus. "Here, Ribsy! Here, old boy! Come back here!" Henry called and started after him. "Eek! A dog!" squealed the lady with the bag of apples. "Go away, doggy! Go away!" Ribsy was scared. He tried to run and crashed into the lady's bag of apples. The bag tipped over and the apples began to roll toward the back of the bus, which was grinding up a steep hill. The apples rolled around the feet of the people who were standing. The passengers began to slip and slide. They dropped their packages and grabbed one another. Crash! A high school girl dropped an armload of books. Rattle, bang, crash! A lady dropped a big paper bag. The paper bag broke open and pots and pans rolled out. Thud! A man dropped a coil of garden hose. The hose unrolled and the passengers found it, wound up in their legs. People were sitting on the floor. They were sitting on books and apples. They were even sitting on other people's laps. Some of them had their hats over their faces and their feet in the air. Screech! The driver threw on the brakes and turned around in his seat. Just as Henry made his way through the apples and books, the pans and hose to catch Ribsy. The driver pushed his cap back on his head. "Okay, Sonny," he said to Henry. "No, you know why these dogs aren't allowed on buses." "Yes, sir," Henry said in a small voice. "I'm sorry." "You're not sorry. A lot of good that does. Look at this bus. Look at those people. I didn't mean to make any trouble," said Henry. "My mother said I could keep the dog if I could bring him home on the bus." The fat man began to snicker, then chuckled. Then he laughed, and then he roared. He laughed until tears streamed down his cheeks, and all the other passengers were laughing too, even the man with the hose and the lady with the apples. The driver did not laugh. "Take that dog off and get off the bus," he ordered. Ribsy whimpered and tucked his tail between his legs. The fat man stopped laughing. "See here, driver," he said. "You can't put that boy and his dog off in the rain." "Well, he can't stay on the bus," snapped the driver. Henry didn't know what he was getting into. Henry guessed he'd have to walk the rest of the way home. He wasn't sure. He knew he knew the way in the dark. Just then a siren screamed. It grew louder and louder until it stopped right alongside the bus. A policeman appeared in the entrance. "There is a boy called Henry Huggins on this bus?" he asked. "Oh boy, you're gonna be arrested for having a dog on the bus," gloated Scooter. "I'll bet you have to go to jail." "I'm him," said Henry in a very small voice. "I am he," corrected the lady with the apples, who had been a school teacher and couldn't help correcting boys. "You'd better come along with us," said the policeman. "Boy, you're sure gonna get it," said Scooter. "Surely going to get it," corrected the apple lady. Henry and Ribsy followed the policeman off the bus into the squad car, where Henry and his dog sat in the back seat. "Are you going to arrest me?" Henry asked thinly. "Well, I don't know. Do you think you ought to be arrested?" "No, sir," said Henry politely. He thought the policemen were joking, but he wasn't sure. It was hard to tell about grown-ups. Sometimes I didn't mean to do anything. I just had to get Ribsy home. My mother said I could keep him if I could bring him home on the bus." "What do you think?" the officer asked his partner, who was driving the squad car. "Well, I think we might let him off this time," answered the driver. "His mother must be pretty worried about him if she called the police. I don't think she'd want him to go to jail. Yes, she's late for dinner already. See how fast we can get him home." The driver pushed a button and the siren began to shriek. Ribsy raised his head and howled. The tires tucked in the wet pavement. The windshield wipers slip-slopped. Henry began to enjoy himself. Wouldn't this be something to tell the kids at school? Mobiles pulled over to the curb as the police car went faster and faster. Even the bus Henry had been on had to pull over and stop. Henry waved to the hill passengers. They waved back up the hill. The police car sped around the corner until they came to Klickitat Street, and then to Henry's block, and then pulled up in front of his house. Henry's mother and father were standing on the porch waiting for him. The neighbors were looking out of their windows. "Well," said his father after the policeman had gone, "it's about time you came home." "So, this is Ribsy? I've heard about you, fellow. There's a big bone and a can of flea flakes waiting for you." "Henry, what will you do next?" sighed his mother. "Golly, Mom, I didn't do anything. I just brought my dog home on the bus like you said." Ribsy sat down and began to scratch. That's the end of Henry and Ribs, Chapter 1. And I hope you're enjoying this book. See me on the next chapter of Beverly Brantley. See you.